Welcome to Coveraging's Pro webinar series. Without further ado, let's get started on the secrets of great dialogue. And I'm here as always with Jim. Good morning, Jim.
Greetings, planet Earth.
And today we have a special guest, Tim Alba. Tim, hello.
Good morning. Thank you for having me today.
Of course. So, Tim, you've got a lot of cool stuff going on right now. Why don't you tell us a bit about that?
Sure. So my background, good morning to all the participants as well, or evening or Sunday, wherever you may be. My background, and I know Jim through my affiliation with the UCLA professional program, where I've taught for probably the last 20 plus years. And I also run a graduate screenwriting program that is a low residency program that meets on the East Coast for 6 weeks each summer at Hollins University. And I do consulting for Pixar animation and for Walt Disney feature animation, and then also run ProPath Screenwriting, which is a seminar series, workshop series that I do with my colleague from UCLA, Linda Voorhees. And one of our students from that series just sold a film to E1. So we're very excited about that. We facilitated that for her. First time writer, lives in DC. She was a tax lobbyist, and we worked with her for about a year on a script and then introduced her to some people, and she sold it. So that's very exciting for her. And so
right on.
Helping move her forward. And then one of the films that I do many things with producing partners named Sean Sorensen, and that E1 film is a film that we're going to produce together as well.
Fantastic. Oh, Sean. Hi, Sean, if you're listening.
Oh, that's right. That's right. You know, Sean.
And you have a seminar coming up soon in May is the next one, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes, in fact, it is our inaugural seminar. It's going to be our very first one. We're doing a building a script from the ground up seminar at the Metaphor Club in Leimert Park here in Los Angeles. My friend Lawrence Ross owns a shared workspace facility there, and they have a meeting space as well. And so Linda and I are going to do a full day Saturday seminar on Saturday, May 4th from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. where we'll cover what makes a classic film, the structure that we teach all our students at UCLA, which has helped all of them do very well for themselves. And we'll talk about character. We'll just talk about what makes a classic film as well, and theme too. So it's kind of cramming 2 years of grad school into 8 hours.
Well, that sounds excellent.
What's the link, Tim?
Yeah.
They could go to our website, which is pretty simple. It's just ProPath, PROPATH, screenwriting.com. And all the details are there.
That's on the screen right in front of you right now as well, guys, if you want to write it down.
Thank you.
Okay, now let's talk about great dialogue. And we are going to start with, what is great dialogue? Okay, so great dialogue is character specific. Now, what does that mean?
Oh, I love these guys. I chose these images because, there are three extremely different and very specific characters. But just imagine Marge Gunderson saying a line saying Pee Wee Herman's lines, or Jules from Pulp Fiction saying a Marge Gunderson line. All three would say them in a very, very different way. When you're writing these characters, that they are, hopefully in the writer's minds, fully realized people with lives and backstories, and the way these people will deliver a line will be very different from each other. And so, we often see scripts coming into Coverage Inc. that are not as character specific as they should be. In other words, you could just remove the names, of the characters saying the line, and you would have no idea who was speaking those lines, because the dialogue feels somewhat generic. Whereas if you have a more full idea of who that character is, then it couldn't possibly be spoken by anyone else. Tim, you want to throw in on that?
Yeah, exactly. I think too many times I see newer writers writing more to the plot. So I always like to use the phrase, you want to write through character, not to plot. And so these characters, and it's funny, I think also too that many new writers look at their characters as people, and sure, they're people, but I like to refer to them as characters because you'd like them to have characteristics, right? And what was the old USA television tagline for all their shows? It was "Characters Welcome," right?
Oh yeah.
And I think too many times new writers don't really think about all the three-dimensional aspects of a character, giving them a back life, giving them, I should say background, what's their backstory. And then you're going to separate yourself from the character, obviously, and then write through that character. So that character becomes the filter. That character's point of view and attitude becomes the filter for what they would actually say.
There's a little exercise, and it might have even been you, Tim, who told us this in class. I can't remember, but someone when I went to UCLA years and years ago said that a great trick is if you remove the character names from your script, you should still be able to figure out who's saying each line on the page, even without that name. That's when you know you've got characters with very specific dialogue.
Exactly. Totally.
Absolutely. And to be even more specific, guys, it's like, look, I would never make sports ball analogies. Other people would make sports ball analogies. People come from different regions. They might have regionalisms. They might use proverbs nobody has ever heard of. They might have hobbies and love Shakespeare and quote Shakespeare all the time. So who is this person and how can we tell from the way they speak? A good thing about dialogue is also, if the material works for it, snappy, witty. Everyone likes snappy, witty dialogue, and that's why we use this little excerpt from Marvelous Mrs. Maisel by Amy Sherman Palladino, because that's kind of her trademark. Very snappy, very witty. These two people are breaking up. He's walking out on the marriage, and Midge.
Let's read the scene. Oh, Tim, you want to do Joel? Tanya, you want to
Sure, go for it.
I have to leave.
Oh, I guess I'll read the
I'm like, line?
Midge stares at him, confused.
I have to leave you.
Beat.
That's my suitcase.
It is.
You're leaving me with my suitcase? But tomorrow's Yom Kippur. Joel?
I'm not happy.
No one's happy. It's Yom Kippur.
I don't know how to do this. I'm not good at things like this.
Things like what? Like leaving me?
Yes.
Well, then don't. Practice a little. Do it later when you're more confident about the moves.
Yeah, nice, tight, snappy dialogue. Well done, by the way.
It's better served by better actors.
Yes.
All right. Look, let's be specific here about what we're talking about as well. So, obviously, you can't always have snappy and witty banter. I mean, it's nice, and when it's appropriate, sometimes it's not appropriate. But when it is appropriate, it's that wonderful sort of heightened dialogue. It doesn't usually happen in real life. Movie dialogue generally, never really is realistic in that sense of, people tend to use ums and uhs and kind of double back on what they say all the time and contradict themselves. And movies and TV and plays, we have the advantage of being able to think these things out in advance and enjoy the experience of a witty, snappy dialogue between two characters. That's wonderful. So I would say, go ahead, Tanya.
Yeah, and it also has to fit with the tone of the show. I mean, this show is built on snappy, witty. I mean, these two people are breaking up. Joel is walking out on their marriage. So this could very easily be, melodramatic and tears and all of that, but that wouldn't really fit with the tone of the show.
Or the points of view of the characters. I mean,
exactly.
Midge is not one to cry.
Exactly.
I would caution that, a little of this can go a long way. And, with all respect to certain writers whose last names might begin with the letter Sorkin, perhaps there are times when this might be too much. And when everyone in your show or your movie, for example, talks in the exact same style, then we lose exactly what we just talked about, which is character specificity, which is, I love The Newsroom. It was a really well-written, wonderfully exciting show with great banter. But after a while, I couldn't watch it anymore because every character talked in the same way. So, you know, you can have the greatest, most snappy, witty dialogue in the world, but if it's not specific to the character, you might lose people.
Yeah, and obviously these are very specific characters that we just mentioned, right?
Absolutely.
Yep.
And now here we come to subtext. Subtext is a wonderful thing, and this is an excerpt from Breaking Bad. If you have not seen it, what are you waiting for? Such a well written show.
Oh, I want to do Gus. Tim, can you be the narrator? Tanya,
Sure.
you can be Walt, and I'll do Gus.
Well, why don't I be the narrator and Tim can be Walt?
Even better. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, I can't express how sorry I am. As it happens, I actually met Agent Schrader. As a matter of fact, Mr. White, your name came up.
Walt Rios digesting this.
Really?
Yes, there happened to be a collection jar out for you. We spoke briefly about your health concerns. I hope that there's some good news.
Yeah, things have improved. Yes.
That's wonderful to hear. It was clear to me how deeply he cares for you.
Walt manages the faintest smile and nod.
All right, so why is this scene laden with subtext? So if you've seen Breaking Bad season 3 episode called I See You, which is a wonderful play on words, just in the episode title alone, it was all about all the subtext in the freaking title of the episode itself. It was all about the secrets coming out. And Breaking Bad, by the way, a wonderful show, top to bottom. It's hard to find a better hour-long drama or more consistently great hour-long drama. It's almost like film school in and of itself. I highly recommend watching the series and then watching it again, top to bottom. But just so well done in the way it conveys subtext. In this particular scene, we have the chickens coming home to roost in the fact that Gus Fring, the bad guy of season 3, he's got Walt's number. He knows that Walt's been bullshitting him every step of the way, and he's figured it all out. And this is his way of telling Walt to his face in a scene in the hospital ICU waiting room that he knows everything that's going on. And watching Walt squirm throughout this entire scene is just delicious.
Yeah, you just want, I mean, in that situation, you obviously what is not said is what's important. And I think too many times, especially with new writers, they don't want anybody to be confused. They want to lay it all out. And so again, that's people writing to the plot as opposed to writing through character. And Gus is being, super, super, I lost the word I wanted to say, passive aggressive, you could say, or threatening. And it's really great stuff. It's really, really good stuff.
Yeah. So the thing is soon, once you're more confident, I think confidence in a writer helps, because once you're more confident, you kind of trust your audience and you trust that you've done the work and that they know what's actually going on.
Very true. Very true.
Tim, do you have any, we do have another subtext example, but Tim, do you have any tips or suggestions for, how a writer can actually bring more subject to the page, to their characters?
Subtext, yeah. I think I really like it when there's a device within the scene that can kind of represent it. So represent the subtext. So for example, there's a great scene in Donnie Brasco with Johnny Depp and Pacino, and it's the scene where they first meet each other in a bar, and Pacino's fronting or Johnny Depp, who's the FBI agent, is fronting, some diamonds to Pacino. He's trying to work his way into his crew, and they're talking about, whether or not the diamonds are fake. But of course, what they're really talking about is whether or not Johnny Depp, who's an FBI agent trying to infiltrate the mob, is a fake. And so that device of the diamonds is the thing that kind of portrays visually the subtext. I think that's an excellent scene, if people want to check that out.
Fantastic. So here's another example of subtext. This is from The Princess Bride, of course.
All right. So I don't think we have to read this scene because, we all know this movie. We've all seen it. It's a fun scene, but suffice it to say, it's the she doesn't get eaten by the eels at this time scene. And I wanted to throw this in there just because it's a different kind of subtext, but it's still subtext. And the hidden meaning in this scene is clearly, both characters are pretending. The Peter Falk's character is pretending to the boy, and the boy is pretending to not care about the story when clearly he is wrapped up in the story. And even in just little scenes like this, William Goldman, who of course legendary, wonderful screenwriter, imbues the scene with subtext, and which helps it sort of transcend what could have just been a flat, boring scene to something that we all instantly and intuitively understand despite the words that are being spoken.
Yeah,
And it
I
has
think
a very great ending, just to
yes,
check
it
it
is a good tag. Yeah. One thing I'd just like to say to that too, though, is obviously we all have to be careful when it comes to the subtext, because I mean, if you had subtext, if you had big subtext in every scene, after a while, I think your audience would just be like, what the hell's going on? So,
Yeah.
obviously it's all within reason, and you want to pick the best spots to use it for sure.
All right, let's go to realistic. What do we mean by realistic?
So realistic in this sense, we often see scripts coming in where the writer has just not done their research, and so their characters do not have that level of verisimilitude. We do not believe this person is a cop because, I mean, we all watch TV and we all see how police investigations work, and if someone does not behave according to that way, well, that can be a good thing, but if it's simply from lack of research or ignorance, it doesn't quite work. Let's just go through this really short scene here from, Tony Gilroy's wonderful The Bourne Ultimatum. And by the way, if you're looking for an action writer whose scripts to read, Tony Gilroy is the guy.
Yeah,
Tanya, do you want to read Landy? And
Sure.
Tim, you can read Wills, and I will do the text and the narrator.
sure.
Okay. Interior CRI Hub Day. 2 new techs, plus the 3 we met before, all watching Vosen lead Landy and Cronin into the room.
This is Pamela Landy. She's going to be quarterbacking our search effort. I think what we ought to do, just to get started, let's go around the room, say who you are and what your spec is.
Landy stepping in before this gets going.
Test your names later. What's Bourne's last fixed position? Anybody?
London, 1200 Zulu.
Status? Wounded? Armed?
Alive. Mobile. Unknown. Punchy, tight, believable. I mean, I don't know anything about the CIA. Well, true, I have books on the CIA, but, this feels to me like, okay, I believe these guys,
Yeah, here's the thing that you can and should do. People will be very happy to talk to you about what they're doing and how they're doing it. So if you're writing an FBI agent, call up the local field office. They probably have like a press relation, and they'd be happy to sit down with you, even if it's you just saying, hey, I'm writing a spec script. They'd be happy to sit down with you and walk you through procedure.
Yeah, the Writers Guild will even connect you with people.
That's right. They have a department that does just that. It's a wonderful thing.
Yes, very true.
So let's go to cliche free. I'm too old for this shit.
So go into thestory.com, which is a wonderful website and resource. They've got a list of literally hundreds of these things. And just do a quick web search, or just go to the site and do a quick search, and you'll find it. And spend a minute just reading. I just excerpted just the top 12 here, but you'll all recognize all of these lines from various different movies. In fact, some cases, many different movies and TV shows. And we all do this subconsciously when we write. We just, we write really quickly. We don't think about what we're writing, and, we regurgitate from other movies or things that sound like they'd be good in the moment. But then it's up to us during the rewrite process to actually catch the cliches, weed them out, and come up with something more distinctive, more unique, less cliche. If you're using cliche lines, people are not going to have a very high opinion of your writing voice because you're stealing someone else's voice. Bring your own voice. Please do not say cliche lines like, "What's the worst that can happen?" Cut to the worst thing happening. We've seen it so many times.
Or the old, oh, that reminds me thing that pushes you into an expository dialogue scene.
There you go.
Economical. And we have a lovely quote from Vince Gilligan.
I'll
Of
read that in
course,
just a second, but yeah, sorry, Tanya, go on.
No, I was just going to say, of course, the creator and writer of Breaking Bad.
Yeah. We all love to spew behind the computer. That's wonderful. And oftentimes we forget the next step, which is you go back and you edit and you refine and you preen. I'm sorry, not preen. You edit. So let's see what Vince Gilligan has to say about this. One of the most important lessons I learned on Breaking Bad is how little dialogue is needed to tell a very complex emotional story. I can't tell you the wonderful times I had where I got to cut my own dialogue like Zorro, lines that I thought were necessary to allow the audience to understand what was going on. I realized these actors are so goddamn good, you just get it. You don't need to explain what's going on. This guy looks to that guy, Skyler looks to Walt or whatever, and you get it. Cut that damn line out. You don't need it anymore.
Agreed.
Absolutely. Again, this comes back to being confident, guys. If you're confident about that the audience will get it, that you've done the work, it's much easier to cut those lines.
Yeah, I think my favorite, if I may, example of that is in Being John Malkovich. There's the Catherine Keener character who is very curt and very short, and tends to just say one or two lines, if any lines at all. And Craig has just gone through Malkovich for the first time. He comes rushing into her office. He's like, "Oh my God, I just went into Malkovich. It was amazing. Oh my God, I went in. I had a piece of wood in my hand. I came out. I didn't have that wood in my hand anymore. I don't know if I can live with the philosophical ramifications of it." And then Catherine Keener's character just looks and points to the window like, "If you can't take it, jump out." She doesn't even say anything, and it's the best line of dialogue in the
movie. So we're at don'ts and traps. So what mistakes can we make? We are on the nose. So what do we mean by on the nose dialogue?
Tim, you want to take that one?
There's an excellent example of it right on the screen. I think you don't want your characters to say what they're thinking, exactly say what they're thinking, because that obviously leads to on-the-nose dialogue. So, you want your characters to be talking around what they're thinking, not saying it specifically. And, I think, again, it comes from objectives. And too many times, obviously this is talking more about scene construction, but dialogue is a part of a scene. Writers tend to, again, write to the story instead of writing to the objective of the character within the scene. So if you've got, you need at least two characters in a scene, maybe they're going after the same thing, but they have a different idea on how they're going to do it. So maybe their objectives are the same, but they differ on how they want to achieve it. And that obviously is going to affect the words that they say or don't say, right? But yeah, on the nose, it's too explanatory. It's too just the writer trying to explain exactly what the character's thinking, and you don't want to tell the audience exactly what the character's thinking. You want to lead them along. You don't want to be specific.
Exactly. And also, if you can put "as you know" in front of anything a character says, just cut it. As in, "As you know, I went to school in Boston and then I moved to New York, and as you know, that's where we met." Yeah, just don't.
Yeah, exactly. Because if they know, then why would they tell them?
Speaking of "as you know" dialogue.
and here it is. So Tanya, just read Linda, I'll read Bill.
"As you know, Bill, we both attended Slappy's Technical Academy from 2007 to 2011, and you got your BS in Applied Farfalator Repair."
True, Linda, with a Y. It's a shame that school had to close down because of that big scandal with Dean Quagmire.
Oh, yes, where he was accused of being a spy for Botswana.
Well, I want to see this movie.
That's hilarious.
Now, mind you, this sort of dialogue in a comedy could actually
Yeah.
work, but that's when the writer is aware that they're utilizing these sort of negative writing characteristics and tendencies for the point of view of, in order to be humorous. Stilted dialogue, as you know, dialogue, on the nose dialogue can be hilarious if the writer is employing it deliberately. Unfortunately, most of the time, that's not the case.
Yeah, it's always better to stay away from that. And let's talk about overwriting and monologuing. I mean, we all like to monologue because we all like to hear ourselves talk, even if it's just on the page. So why should we not overwrite or monologue?
And by the way, I put Syndrome in here because of his wonderful line. Oh, you caught me monologuing. So, I mean, look, again, we all love to write. We all love to write a lot. And, not a lot of us like the second part of it, which is the going back and editing and tightening it up part, which is so crucial. Rule of thumb, if a scene's running more than 2 or 3 pages, you might want to go back and look to see what you can cut. Or even if it isn't, please go back and look to see what you can cut, because so much about great dialogue is removing extraneous lines or words that don't need to be there, so that the words that do remain have more punch and more impact.
Yeah, I think I think it's Birdman from Alcatraz or some Clint Eastwood movie where he's playing a prisoner, I think, and he's being interviewed, and the interviewer asks, "So, tell me about your childhood." And the beginning writer would have written a big long monologue. When I was 5, my dad left us, blah 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 blah. But what the Clint Eastwood character in the film says to the question, "Tell me about your childhood," he says, "It was short." That's all you need. That tells you, and that's great subtext too. I mean, obviously it wasn't good. It tells you everything you need to know without telling you anything.
Yeah. Now, of course, mind you, there are times when a great, scenery chewing monologue will be absolutely appropriate. And again, it's when the writer uses it deliberately for a specific effect, then it can just be absolutely wonderful and exactly what is called for. You might need that Howard Beale moment. You might need that you can't handle the truth moment. But if it's happening all the time throughout your entire screenplay, then you really need to take a closer look at what you're doing.
Yeah, Jim, that's an excellent point, if I may. It's situation specific too, right? So like you can't handle the truth. Obviously, that's that's testimony in a trial. So somebody's going to pontificate, right? At least in a movie. I've been in real life trials where you get in trouble for that. And then, so like that, in that particular situation, obviously, you would expect the character to say that. Or like Michael Dorsey at the end of Tootsie, right? When he gives his big speech, he's an actor. Of course, he's going to give a big speech.
And here we've got play or novel versus movie and TV dialogue. Now, this is an excerpt from a bee handing in Spokane, which is by a wonderful writer named Martin McDonough. As a screenwriter, you know him from In Bruges and Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. But he got his big break as a playwright with Beauty Queen of Lebanon, The Pillow Man, etc. Anyway, he writes wonderful characters with wonderful dialogue, but of course this is from a play, so you would not necessarily have this amount of dialogue in a screenplay.
Yeah, we're not going to read this, but please feel free to, because it's great, and I mean, the wonderful writer. We're all McDonough fans here. I mean, just incredible. But as an emerging screenwriter, and let's underline the difference between an emerging screenwriter and established screenwriter. As an emerging screenwriter, you have far less leeway in what people will. We'll let you do. If you're Aaron Sorkin, you can hand in a screenplay that's 170 pages and no one will bat an eye, and everyone will say, "Thank you, sir, may I have another?" But if you're an emerging screenwriter, 110 pages for your feature and 55 for your pilot is pretty much about the most people are going to allow, maybe 60. So you know, in terms of, this sort of dialogue that should be, better served in perhaps a play or a novel, you've got a lot more space, you've got a lot more pages. Playwrights are expected to choose scenery. You've really got nothing going on except dialogue in a play, and so that's what it's got to be. But movies are a visual experience. Television shows are a visual experience. It's all about being cinematic, and lots of times those big wordy things, kind of going back to what we just said before, they don't fit. Sometimes they do, but oftentimes that stuff just needs to be edited down, because it just doesn't work for the medium.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, movies are meant to move, right? And yeah, I think you really don't. It really doesn't hit home until you either go to a read through of your script before they shoot it, or you're actually on set and you realize just everything that it takes to just get a coherent scene done and shot. And so less is always, always, always more, as Vince Gilligan would say. And yeah, these are great for plays because plays, all the information comes through the words, right? But the words the characters speak. But in movies, 99% of the time, the information that you're getting across about your characters is coming through things that they say, things that they do, not what they say.
Show,
Exactly.
show don't tell.
And show don't tell. And here we've got another issue that crops up sometimes, but not as often as overly verbose. That crops up a lot, but sometimes not enough exposition can also crop up, which is when it's just so down to the weeds that you're kind of leaving the audience out in the cold, and they don't know exactly what's going on.
You mentioned this before, Tim. You were talking, specifically, you got to have a little bit of exposition in there just so people can follow what's going on in the story.
Yeah, and I mean, and look, in my opinion, the key to great dialogue is conflict. And so whether it's a conflict between two people, or conflict between a person and an object within a scene, or just conflict between a person and what they're thinking or feeling, exposition comes through conflict. And so when we were doing the thing with the on the nose dialogue, there's no conflict in that, right? That actually dialogue could work if there was conflict in the scene, but there is no conflict, and exposition comes through conflict.
Exactly. And another problem that sometimes happens is when you get an overload of certain things. And in fact, sometimes that actually is a result of people having done their homework, which is great and that's fantastic and you absolutely should. But then people having done their homework but not being able to then just drop their homework and let the character live. I think that's often a cause for an overload of stuff.
I think sometimes when people are dealing with, REAL, reality, you're absolutely right. They just do. What's the word I'm trying to say? It's just too much. It's too much information. They know too much, and that gets in the way of them actually writing. I think knowing less is more. I'm working with a writer right now. She's writing a biopic. She has a Life Writes the Sky, and it's a medical-based drama, and the medical jargon is so cumbersome in the script that you lose sight of the characters. And what I think they have to realize is, 99% of the audience isn't going to care about that stuff. There's only 1% of the audience that are brain surgeons, and they're the ones who are going to care. But the rest, everybody else, it doesn't really matter.
The other, yeah, we see that a lot in scripts too. The more learned the writer, when they tend to write something that takes place in their field, the more easy it is for them to get lost in the weeds, like Tanya said before. But the other thing I wanted to mention in this category is the patois sort of thing, which is, lots of times we see scripts come in where people try to literally write on the page the slang or the dialect of, let's say characters from Louisiana or whatever. And, a little bit of that goes a long way. I mean, if you just put in your description that, they speak with a strong Cajun accent or something, for example, then just write the dialogue normally. I mean, maybe a couple of a couple of abbreviations or something here and there, but you don't want it to be opaque. The reading experience needs to be still understandable, and trust me, the actors will figure out how to interpret the dialogue in a way that's authentic to the character.
Yeah, trust your actors.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So then we come to what's often very hard for people when they set something in a period that's not our own. Some people have a knack for it. Other people have to do some more work. So this is a great example. This is from Emma Thompson's adaptation of Jane Austen's Sense and Sensibility. And this scene is also wonderful when it comes to subtext.
Now, before we get to the scene, let's just say these examples that we have coming up here, they are the reason we chose them is because of clarity. That they convey a sense of the historical era in a way, but still they are written in a way that we can all understand. They may not be actually historically accurate, but they have the flavor of the period, and that's really, as a movie and television writer, what you need to get across. You have to sort of be true to the time period, but also understandable, comprehensible. Let's just read this little scene here. Tim, do you want to be Edward, Tanya, Eleanor, and then I will do the narrator?
Sure. May I inquire why the Colonel did not tell me himself?
I think he felt it would be better coming from a friend.
Edward looks at Eleanor, his eyes full of sadness.
Your friendship has been the most important of my life.
You will always have it.
Forgive me.
Mr. Ferrers, you honor your promises. That is more important than anything else. I wish you both very happy.
They rise. She curtsies. He bows.
Goodbye, Miss Dashwood.
Edward leaves silently. Eleanor stands stock still in the middle of the room. So what's going on in that scene, Tanya?
So what's going on is that Edward has been engaged to a woman for a very long time that he actually does not love. He loves Eleanor, Eleanor loves him, but he has been disinherited for being engaged to that other woman who doesn't have a dowry. But even though he doesn't love her, and even though he's been disinherited, he will still be true to his word, the promise he made so many years ago. And now Edward also knows that Eleanor knows, and now Eleanor is charged with giving him actually a job opportunity from the Colonel so he can make a living. So it's heavy with subtext because they're also saying, I'm sorry, they're saying, I love you, they're saying goodbye.
Mm-hmm.
But we can understand what's going on, even though it takes place in 1870, whatever. How is that possible?
Yes, but it still does not sound contemporary. We definitely get the flavor. We understand it very well, but we get the flavor that, if it's not contemporary.
Yeah, it's a little more formal, right?
Exactly. And here's another example of not contemporary, which is The Terror. And that show, they only had one season so far. It's an anthology show, but it was clear just from that, the first season, how much research went into the writing of that show.
Yeah, let's not read this one. It's a little dense, but you all at home can read this. Certainly, you see it up on your screen. It's a great scene. I encourage everyone to go watch this show. It's just really well done. But from the point of view of what Tanya just said specifically, the writers of this show did an incredible job interpreting the language of the era and all the technical detail that they brought to the show in a way that contemporary audiences can understand. It was just a masterpiece. And in fact, I even read that the writers challenged the people watching the show to fact check them. That's how proud they were of the work that they did. So just a wonderful piece of writing, a really great show. And it's not really a horror show. It's a little bit horrific, but it's more of interpersonal drama between a bunch of stranded men. It's just a wonderful show.
Huh. Interesting.
All right, so here is something, and I want to challenge you guys to figure out what decade this takes place. Not a lot of people have seen this show, so I'm hoping you don't just know. But this is one of the characters speaking, and yeah, so if you can just type into your question box what decade you think this character lives in.
I'll just read the dialogue. Fine, you want retreads? Be my guest. Merv and the Midnight Special can have first shot at my kids. I got more producers and agents packing this place every night than Telly Savalas has lollipops. Because if you're waiting for them to act stable, you've got a long fucking wait.
Exactly. And we have all those, all the people coming in with their 1970s. Yes, it's the 70s, guys. It's the 70s. So so you all knew it was the 70s. How did you know it was the 70s?
The Telly Savalas reference?
Exactly.
Midnight Special,
Midnight Special, Merv and the Midnight Special. Yeah, exactly.
And if you haven't seen the show, I'm Dying Up Here, recently canceled on Showtime. What a tragedy. Just a brilliant show. I would even say this was the best written show on the air in 2018.
Yeah.
Two seasons of it absolutely worth watching, especially season 2 with Brad Garrett. Just the best work of his career. Absolutely phenomenal show.
Yeah, I mean, it's so sad because I think it was good in its first season and great in its second, and I think it suffered because the first couple of episodes were the weakest, and I think it suffered from that, like of season 1, the pilot, the next couple of episodes until they kind of found their footing with a huge ensemble cast. And I think the show suffered for that, but it was just such a good show. So especially season 2 was just so brilliant. Do watch it. It's wonderful. Number 3, what can I do to develop an ear for great dialogue? So, by the way, this is a photo of Tim in.
Hey, who's that guy there?
Yeah, who is
that? Guy,
yeah. Tim, where's that photo from, by the way?
That is actually at the Metaphor Club in Leimert Park, a wonderful shared workspace spot that I highly recommend. It's a really great new up and coming spot, and they do a ton of evening guest speaker series, and we do a monthly reading series there where 6 different writers present the first 10 pages of their script. In fact, that's what that's at, and those are the actors there that are performing the scripts. It's a great spot.
Oh, how fun. How awesome is that? Okay, so I love the huge blackboard with all the terminology you scribbled on it. That's fantastic. But okay, so let's just go through these real quick. Read scenes aloud. Okay, so if you want to develop an ear for great dialogue, you got to hear it. If you're looking at what's on the page, it's going to be completely different than when you speak it aloud. Words either come to life or they crash and burn when they're spoken. It's obviously better in a room full of people, or even if you're just reading it, with a husband or wife or friend or whomever. But if you're actually in a group situation, it's so incredibly helpful. Yes. Be it in a writer's group or a classroom type situation. Tim, this is what you do all the time. You can speak to this.
Yeah, I think there's nothing better than to hear actors read your work. And really a great way to learn how to write dialogue is to take an acting class.
Yeah, that's on our list as well. We'll get to that in just a second.
Sorry.
That's okay. No worries. You're skipping ahead, damn it. Listen and research. So, a little picture from 8th grade here, which was a wonderful movie, Bo Burnham's debut, and talk about authentic sounding dialogue, having an ear for dialogue. I mean, Bo Burnham, man, can't say enough. Great comedian too, but what a wonderful screenplay. But yeah, I mean, just anything you can do to actually listen to what the dialogue in any given situation realistically sounds like. As I said, go to the mall and just listen to teens, get on the bus, ride the train, just listen to the people around you. As we said before, interview people, call them up. People will be happy to talk to you. Cops, lawyers, you'd be dentists, whatever. If you're writing, a story about a plumber who gets into trouble with the mob, go talk to a plumber. They'll be happy to talk talk to you. Let them tell stories, and then you'll have the stories in their voice, and then you can bring that to your screenplay or your pilot.
Yeah, I think I'm sorry if I
Oh,
just
no,
may
go
jump.
ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's the bummer with living in LA, right? Is we spend the majority of our time in cars and alone or in Ubers. And so, we're not able to kind of be out and about. But real quickly, I just wanted to say we had brought Craig Barton, the writer of the Dallas Buyers Club, into our class at UCLA last week, and he talked about how when he was writing the character of Rayon, he went to Yum Yum Donuts in Hollywood every night for 2 weeks between midnight and 5 a.m. and just talked to the people in the donut shop. He'd buy them donuts, buy them cigarettes, and boy, they would just open up and tell them stories like you wouldn't imagine. And then those stories, and the way that they would tell them ultimately became who Rayon was and what Rayon's voice was in the movie.
Boom. Oh, that's so perfect.
Exactly. And especially, quick side note, especially when it comes to writing teens, writers have a lot of problems writing teens in particular because it very often just comes out as, very cliche as of, 20 years ago. So I think especially teens, and again, the mall is the perfect place to do your research on that. And another good resource is YouTube, because whatever there is, it's on YouTube. If you want a political speech from 1946, go to YouTube. If you want a teen talking about the newest fashion, go to YouTube. Great resource.
Yeah, it's YouTube has basically made celebrities out of people of all ages. You'd be amazed if you haven't looked. Who's got YouTube channels and who's got thousands of subscribers. I mean, there are guys in their basement apartment in Albuquerque who have more viewers every week than some national television shows putting out their YouTube shows. The script has completely flipped. But the point is that there's all these different voices that are out there that are free. You just have to go find them.
Yep, I agree.
Absolutely. And then now we come to take an acting class. And the reason for that is that what you will notice when actors turn to screenwriting, their dialogue is always great. Their structure might be atrocious, their plotting insane, but their dialogue is always, always, always wonderful. And the reason for that is they spend quite a bit of time trying to make dialogue that someone else wrote sound good and sound natural.
Now, Tim, you mentioned this before. Was there something else specific about the acting class experience that you think would be helpful for screenwriters?
Yeah, what it really shows you is that less is more. It just does, because again, when you're shooting a film, it's very different than being on stage. And so the less you have to say, the better. It just moves things along more quickly. And again, you want that specificity. You want that, curt, short, to the point. But yeah, acting classes are great because it really just shows you how much you probably are overwriting no matter what.
All right.
Exactly. Read great scripts.
Yeah, well,
Yes,
that should go without saying. But yes, read great scripts.
Yeah, it's stunning to me just how few times with our clients that they actually seem to have ever even seen a screenplay. I mean, it's terrible to say. Okay, it's not that often, but it does happen often enough to actually mention in this webinar. So, if you're thinking of being a screenwriter in general, you probably should see what a screenplay looks like before you attempt to do it. And certainly if you're trying to write great dialogue or dialogue at all, look at how the best people have done it and take cues from them. What inspired me to be a screenwriter in the first place was 30 years ago reading William Goldman's book, Adventures in the Screen Trade. Still a great book. He talks all about his experiences with Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, and even has the script in the book. And you read his wonderful dialogue, the way he puts things together, but particularly those words coming out of the characters' mouths. Every single one just so well chosen, so perfect, so character specific, so witty, and you fall in love with not just those characters, but with the writer, the writing process. At least I did. So please get out there, just experience some great writing. There's so much good content and material out there. Watching it on the screen is one thing, but reading it on the page is another.
Yep, I completely agree.
Yep. So here we have our top 5 dialogue secrets.
So, all right. So these are, it might seem a little not contradictory, but a little counterintuitive, some of them possibly at first. So, but let me explain. So, number one, beware of complete sentences. So, as I mentioned earlier on, when we speak, we don't often, speak with, well, as I'm doing right now, I'm interrupting myself. I'm saying,
Yeah.
I'm losing track of what I'm saying in the middle of the sentence and having to regroup. These are all trademarks of the way people actually speak. We contradict ourselves. Something else happens to distract us. Bringing a little bit of that flavor into your dialogue will inevitably make it seem more realistic. If you're just writing, like a term paper with everything, every sentence is a complete sentence. And a lot of screenwriters think that because we all have this imprinted into our heads from the college experience where good writing is, complete sentences, and because that's what's drilled into our heads, right? Screenwriting completely different, clipped short sentences, single word sentences, things that are not grammatically correct are perfectly okay. And in fact, desirable because that's the way we speak. The object is to create something that actually emulates real human speech patterns. That's why I say beware complete sentences.
Yes, definitely. And again, it comes back to character, attitude, and point of view, right? I mean, obviously, somebody who grew up in, on the rough streets of East St. Louis is going to speak very differently, not only just their vocabulary, but also, in their manner than, somebody who grew up in Beverly Hills.
Right. And someone who did grow up in Beverly Hills and is well educated might actually speak in complete sentences and might not use contractions, et cetera, et cetera. So all of that goes back to character specificity again. But the point is just sort of shake that mindset of, I have to write in complete grammatically correct sentences in screenplay dialogue. Not true. Don't do it.
Yep.
Number 2, replace dialogue with body language wherever possible. This is a little trick that I like to use. I'll write a scene, and oftentimes I will overwrite, as we tend to do. And, I'll write a scene that's maybe 4 or 5 pages long, and I'll think, okay, how can I trim this down to, 2 to 3 pages or even less if possible. And one trick that I like to do is anytime a piece of dialogue can be replaced with a look or a twitch or anything else, I do it. Just cut it right out. First of all, it's more visual. It gives the actors something to do. Secondly, it can help to create subtext because we're getting into the mindset of the character without them actually saying anything. And third, it feels just more natural. But probably most importantly, it speeds things up.
So let me quickly interject here because we had a question specifically about replacing dialogue with body language. Someone was worried that people will get upset because they're directing the actors. And okay, let me just quickly answer that. Usually, you're not stepping on the director's toes when you say the character hums and haws, or Joe falls down on the couch exhausted. The only time somebody will tell you that you are stepping on the director's toes is if you're actually directing the movie, as in, we have a close-up on this person, or the camera follows him into the bathroom. That is when people will get upset, because that is when you're stepping on the director's toes. But you absolutely should use bring in the body language. What is the character doing? Because sometimes what they're doing, as opposed to, we just need to see it, so that way they don't have to tell us how they feel, because we see how they feel.
There is a lot of directing on the page in Breaking Bad scripts. Now, granted, those guys could do whatever they want, and that's fine. But of course, the rule of thumb for screenwriters is you're not supposed to direct on the page. Let the actors act. And Breaking Bad just shatters that rule. And and of course it works for that show. And what Vince Gilligan said about it was, somehow or another, the actors read all this stuff that can't possibly translate to the screen about what the characters are thinking, and they're so good as actors that it beams out magically through their eyes, and we get it. So his point of view was, yeah, get it on the page and let the actors worry about interpreting it. Now, of course, that can be overload for a spec screenplay, and maybe you don't want to do that. That's contrary to what's taught. Tim, you have any thought on that in regard, like what is too much in terms of directing on the page?
Yeah, I mean, you don't, it's the big moments, or even just hinting at the big moments. I mean, you wouldn't write, Susan walks into the room, puts her key, takes her keys from her purse, hangs them on the hook by the door, then walks over to the living room, opens the drapes, turns on the television. You don't want to do that. You would write, Susan does her daily back home routine, hangs up keys, opens drapes. You want to write it more concisely, more specifically. But yeah, you don't want to go into the minutia. For me, the action to point out would be anything that creates conflict within the scene, right? And so, somebody not reaching for the bill at a dinner, right? That could create conflict. That's an action that does a lot more than the character saying, why don't you pay for it this time, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the action should be, it not only is just action for action's sake, it needs to move the story forward and also reveal character.
Excellent. And never answer a question. Jim, what
So
do we
Yeah,
mean by that?
this is another little trick that I like to use. Oftentimes, when you're writing, you'll have people just, who are, especially in a conflict-laden scene, they're confronting each other, and they'll ask a question of the other person. And I have often found that, when I answer that question on the page, when I'm writing dialogue, it's a confirmation or not a confirmation, but either one of those can generally be done without. If you just do not answer, then that can be possibly taken as, an affirmation of the negative. Is, in other words, no, or it becomes blowing the other person off, or the answer is simply not necessary. So for all of those reasons, you could leave it out. Or if the answer is in the affirmative, it could possibly be done with a nod or a smile, or again, it could just be implied by the response without actually directly answering the question. What I'm specifically getting at here is oftentimes responses to questions come across as filler or bloat. We don't need them. Whereas, we can infer through body language or simply the tone of the scene itself what the answer is, or maybe the answer isn't necessary. I often find that dialogue just simply has a better flow if you're answering questions, the other person doesn't answer, and we just keep going. Do we need the answer to the question? Oftentimes we don't. Now, obviously, there are going to be times when you need to actually answer a question, but it's just a little tip that I keep in the back of my head of, when I'm going back to do my edit pass, looking for things to cut. That's usually first on the chopping block.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, and I would agree wholeheartedly. And I'm going to take it one step further, and this is in no way disputing what you just said, because I agree with you completely, Jim. But I would also even look at those situations and say, you know what? Sometimes it's better to have the character make a statement instead of even asking the question. So, for example, asking a question, you got two characters. Character walks in the room, the other one says, "How tall are you?" Or you could have the character say, "You're not as tall as I thought you were." That's saying the same thing, but one of them's a question, the other one's a statement. There's more conflict in the statement.
Right.
Absolutely true. And no matter how small the scene, if no subtext is immediately apparent, invent it.
So, this is just another little trick that I like to use to just give a little flavor to anything that's going on. And I put in the little picture of the surly waiter here just because, it's kind of a trope. We've seen it before, but, if you've got just kind of a boring dialogue scene between two characters and there's no conflict, how do you get some conflict in there? Well, you add a surly waiter in the background, damn it, clearly having a bad day and does not want to be there. The point is, even small characters on the screen have lives in theory, and they're bringing their baggage with them no matter what it is they're doing. And you can have a flat scene where someone gets pulled over by a cop and the cop is just license and registration, and that's fine. Or you can imbue that cop with some life story and some personality that has to do with that cop's life experience, and suddenly it becomes a completely different scene or experience. The scene might still play out the same way on the page, but maybe there'll just be an extra layer to it that brings a little extra something something. And if you do that throughout your screenplay, you can potentially take characters that might just read flat and one-dimensional and add a slightly higher level to them that makes them more relatable.
Agreed. Yep.
Absolutely. And the final one, lose the small talk. And it's actually interesting how many writers have a hard time with it. I think maybe it's because we were raised to be polite. So it's always, hello, how are you? Long time no see. Isn't the weather lovely?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the first thing that should go when you're doing your edit pass, and yet so often it doesn't, and it's still in there. This is kind of basic when it comes to screenwriting, and yet oftentimes we convince ourselves in our heads that this dialogue is important. And an objective person might say that's not important. How is that important? But in our heads, we think it is. So sort of train yourself to just look for that stuff and get rid of it. The maxim is get into scenes late and get out early. In other words, just the important part of the scene. If two characters meet and have a conversation and it takes 5 minutes, the first minute of that conversation is going to be, hey, how you been? What's going on? Let's do a little catch up. The last minute of that is, okay, say hi to the wife and don't forget blah, blah, blah. We don't need any of those things on either end. Just the stuff in the middle is all we need. Law and Order, great example for this. They sometimes have scenes that are one line of dialogue long. That's all you need. Boom.
Yep.
One line scenes. That's it.
Well, or going back to what you were saying too earlier, Jim, about different characters sounding differently, or there's that great scene in The Wire where it's the fuck scene where they're searching a crime scene, and it's two of the cops, and the only word they say is fuck over and over and over again, but with different intonations and different reactions to different things.
All right, and here we have our Q&A. So this is the time where you can find your question chat box and shoot away with questions.
While we're waiting for questions to come in, Tim, I want to ask you, since you have had the wonderful experience of, teaching and lecturing at Pixar and Disney, in the context of dialogue specifically, can you tell me, like, how do you advise them? I mean, what do you tell them? Is there anything you can tell them? And what's that experience like?
Well, I think there's this misconception that, just because people are doing it on a professional level that, they never have issues or they never have problems or they never have questions. And so, first off, everybody starts from the same place, right? In those particular situations at the studios, a lot of times I'm just acting as, either a guide or an extra set of eyes and ears, or helping the story artist better understand character and dialogue and situation. So we're always going back to who is this person, what's their attitude, what's their point of view, or fish, it doesn't have to be a person. What happened. I think another important thing that many first-time writers forget, that we track a lot at the studios too, is what happened in the previous scene and how is that affecting how the characters feel in this scene. And that's going to affect, obviously, word choice, the things they say, the things they do, and even more specifically too, when it comes to dialogue, what is it that you're setting up here that you're also trying to pay off later?
Great. So let's come to the first question. When you're writing a mute character, unable to speak due to a medical condition preceding the story, do you have any tips for bringing out their intentions and motivations? Would it be mainly action-imbued subtext?
Wow, that sounds like a really fun challenge, actually. You know, I would say, you know, this is going to be, this is something you could have a field day with in terms of in terms of well, you know, subtext certainly, but you know, body language absolutely. Uh, but you know, how does a character like that convey their meaning? You know, we are such a visual society. I think you may find that a character like that might be able to get their meaning across much more easily than we might think at any given time. First of all, because they've probably had years practicing, depending on how recently this person is mute. You know, but you know, we're just so visual. People can convey things just with expressions, and not even counting things like ASL stuff like that. I don't know, Tim. What do you think on that?
Yeah, I think it would all be through the description. And I think a tricky thing is it's not necessarily a dialogue note, but more of a description note. And I think, again, too many times new writers write, Jim walks in the room, all the specific actions you take. And obviously you don't need to do that. But also, too, I see a lot of beginning writers struggle with how much to leave out in description or how much can they suggest. And so when you're dealing with people who aren't speaking but rather just acting, or using their actions speak for themselves, you can hint at what the emotion is behind it. You can, obviously, in this particular situation, and in my 20 years of doing this, I've never received this question. It's an awesome question. I think you would just state it in the description. You would just write, he or she makes the hand gesture. That's, is that what you mean? Or are you sure? You could totally write that in description in that particular situation.
You know, as well, how does the character generally communicate? Is there a way, you know, obviously if the other people around this person, you know ASL or something, that's a whole different story. But you know, let's say look at Mark Margolis in the wheelchair in Breaking Bad with his little bell. The character's name is eluding me. But you know, he with just being able to say yes or no by tinging a bell just creates just a wonderful way of how does this character get his message out there. And watching Mark twitch in that chair and his wonderful facial expressions as he's trying to get his meaning across, we get it. We, the audience, absolutely get it, even if the characters on the screen do not. So perhaps there's another way that this mute character has developed of getting their message across, either writing things on paper or maybe they've got a bell, whatever it is, that can be a really fun device.
That's a really great example.
All right, on to the next question. Do you suggest working out stories from plot to character, or characters first and then plot?
Tim, I think that one's for you.
Yeah, character first always. And I'll give you a quick Pixar example. So I'm sure everybody's seen Finding Nemo, right? Sure, it's very easy to just say, okay, this is a movie about a fish that gets lost in the ocean and his dad and sidekick have to go and find him, right? But instead, you want plot to come from the defining characteristic of your character. So in that film, Marlin is overprotective. That's his defining characteristic. Why is he overprotective? Well, because his whole family was eaten except for Nemo, right? Nemo, on the flip side, is rebellious. Why is Nemo rebellious? Because his father is overprotective. See how the psychology creates the character and the character's actions. Because Nemo's rebellious, he goes too far to touch the whatever thing he wanted to touch in the deep, and he gets lost, right? So again, because of the character's defining characteristics, the story exists. And then what they do brilliantly there is you take a character like Marlin, he's overprotective because he can't let go of the past, and you team him up with someone who can't remember what happened 5 minutes ago.
Next question. How much intelligence credit do you give a movie audience? Do they get it more than we realize? That is a great question.
Bravo. That is wonderful. Wow. Oh, well, what was it P.T. Barnum once said? No one ever went broke overestimating the intelligence of the American public. Was that it?
Yeah.
You don't want to talk down to an audience, and herein lies the problem or the challenge with people writing things that they may not have. You always hear the phrase "write what you know." My feeling is you gotta to write what you feel, not what you know. And so, because what do I know? All right, I know writing, but that's not going to be a very interesting movie, right? But I know rejection, I know success, I know struggle, I know failure, and those are the types, I felt those things. And so, you want to write from where somebody feels, not from where they think. And I would argue that every audience member has feelings, right? They may not have the same intellectual level or intellectual ability, but we all work from a place of feelings. And movies are all about emotion. And so for me, I'm not writing down you don't want to write down to the audience, you want to write to what they feel.
The reason I brought up Breaking Bad yet again was because, I think that show it proved that you can write intelligently, you can write things that are inferred or take place between the lines, and people will be able to follow. It's
Oh
not the
yeah.
Brady Bunch. It's not shows that formerly everybody sort of had to write to the common denominator in television, and I think shows like The Sopranos and Game of Thrones and, Dexter, the whole great sort of second coming of television from the early 2000s on, it proved that there is, the audience will be with you if you give them entertainment that is smarter and exists on a higher level. Whether or not that's still true in features on the studio side, I'm not sure. Maybe you can speak to that more, Tim. Certainly on the indie side, there's a lot more latitude for that. But in terms of interpreting the intelligence of the audience and writing for the lowest common denominator, my impression is that there's still quite a bit of that on the feature side.
Yeah, but I mean, nobody walks into a room and says, "All right, let's make a stupid movie for stupid people." So everybody wants to do their best work, and again, I think I think it's also depends on what you're writing, right? I mean, obviously, an Adam Sandler movie where all the guys go to camp or whatever, you're writing to a certain level as opposed to Sense and Sensibility, right? I mean, I think you write to what the genre is, not to who the audience is.
Absolutely. On to the next question. How does this relate to the use of narrator in a movie?
I mean, in relation to dialogue, I'm assuming.
Yep.
To me, voiceover, everybody always is like, oh, don't use voiceover, don't use voiceover. I have no problem with people using voiceover, but the key to good voiceover is adding something to what we're seeing, not just telling us what we're seeing. You don't want to write, when I was 6, I was really cute, and we're seeing, a cute 6-year-old, right? You want that voiceover to give us an extra layer of understanding to the character, and you want it to portray attitude and point of view.
Tim?
Whoops. Can you hear me now?
All right. Yes, now I can hear you. Now I can hear you fine.
Yeah,
just repeat the last couple of sentences, because I think we may have lost you there.
Shoot, what was I saying? You want that voiceover to add to what we're seeing, not just reiterate what we're seeing. And so, for example, there's I don't know if I can. Well, I'll reference it anyway. American Beauty, Kevin Spacey, right? He has
American Beauty. I was just about to say.
Yeah, there's a lot of voiceover at the beginning of that movie, right? When he introduces himself to us in the world, and he says, for example, he says, when he's masturbating in the shower, he's like, this is the highlight of my day, right? So it's not just there's me masturbating in the shower. There's me masturbating in the shower. This is the highlight of my day. So it adds another level of understanding and conflict to the character.
Look at Dexter, which could not exist without the voiceover that informs the duality of the character. The reason that show is so successful is because of that. Morgan Freeman's voiceover in Shawshank Redemption. Could you imagine that movie without that?
Yeah. Again, you want it to add to the understanding of the character and the plot.
Okay, on to the next one. Do you prefer foreign characters to speak in their native language, or do you prefer to say in French and write the line in English?
You have to assume the person reading your script doesn't speak French. So, you've got to write it in English. And, you would just you either do a note at the beginning of the script, unless otherwise noted, all, dialogue is written all dialogue is spoken in French with English subtitles, but you would write it in English.
When I was first starting out, I wrote a screenplay in which there was a scene between two characters who spoke in Italian, the entire scene. And I went to my mom who did speak Italian, and she painstakingly translated the entire scene for me. And I put the whole 3-page scene in Italian with the English translation subtitled under every line. And I was so proud of myself, like, look at my authenticity. I
There you
actually went
go.
and did that, and of course somebody wound up telling me, no, you don't need it. Just get rid of all that crap. Just put in Italian and then put the
Yeah.
English. Like, oh,
Whoops.
yeah.
Should one use the word beat, or is that an actor's term?
Within
I
dialogue.
like beat. I don't understand. Yeah, within dialogue. I don't
Yeah.
understand why people wouldn't use beat. I like beat. What do you like beat, Tim?
Yeah, as long as it's appropriate. I mean, you don't want to overuse it because you don't want to direct the actor on the page. That's for sure. So it's, and I always like to say, the dialogue, it's almost like lyrics to a song, right? And when you're singing, you got to take a breath, right? Occasionally there's bridges from one, verse to the next. I would look at dialogue the same way. What are the patterns of speech? If you've got a character who's, hyped up on, drugs, they might speak really quickly, right? And kind of oddly. Whereas somebody who's, just very meticulous and sure of themselves, they're going to speak in a different speed and a different, manner as well. And so I think, yeah, that's the key to it, is you just want to write it again, specifically to who they are. But if you have a beat, I try and have it be some type of action if possible, if you're looking to break up dialogue. But yeah, I mean, within reason, you can use beat to signify somebody takes a break or a breath, sure.
On the same topic of nonverbal characters, how do you allow for characters who use sound instead of words? Think Chewbacca.
Yeah, I think you would just write Chewbacca roars or Chewbacca snorts, or yeah, you can totally write what the action is, what the noise is that they make. But and if actually that gets tricky, because when it comes to Chewbacca, I can't imagine that it says Chewbacca and then they write roar. It was probably just an action cue.
Do you have any examples for using dialects, such as from Appalachia? Are there others besides Coal Miner's Daughter that could be referred to? Any examples you can give the writers about movies with strong dialects?
Matewan, October Sky. Those are two that I can think of as on the topic of Appalachia. Both take place in those areas. Those would be the two that come right away to the top of my head.
Okay,
Right on.
great. Also, if you're looking for examples of dialects, a good resource is for actors. Actually, there used to be tapes, and I'm sure nowadays it's online with just for actors to learn dialects, to learn different dialects. So as a writer, you're, of course, can check that out as well.
Yeah, and I think you have to be careful.
Right.
You may not want to write it out phonetically per se. So you may just, again, make a note that, it's written a certain way, but, with a certain dialect.
I heard that action description should be in balance with dialogue. In other words, there should be a lot of white on the page. Yes, do you agree? Yes, we do. Oh, yes, we do. We do very much. White on the page.
Mm-hmm. Less is always
Less is always more. Absolutely. No, look, I mean, if you crack the spine of a script and the first thing you see is a wall of black ink on the page, you are not going to have a positive first impression of that screenplay. But if you open it up and you just see lots of wonderful white space, the reader relaxes because they know, oh, okay, it's going to be an easier read. It'll hopefully be a breezy and fast read, and I'll have time to do other things in the day other than slog through this screenplay. So it's a little bit of a psychological trick, but it's also it helps the writer to convey things more punchily when you have to keep that in mind. If you understand that you do need to keep your scene description down to, as few words as possible, certainly no more than a few lines, and you have to keep your dialogue as punchy as possible. Well, just keep it moving, keep it flowing, and remember, value the time of the people reading it, because you want them to like your screenplay.
As a general rule, I don't do any description paragraphs more than 4 lines long, so it looks like there's less words.
There you go.
Absolutely. All right, one more quick question. In articles and podcasts about writing, we are sometimes encouraged, within reason, to work outside of established screenwriting rules if it benefits the story. For example, use camera directions if it clarifies the intent. Is there any such rule bending or breaking when it comes to dialogue that you might encourage? Well, I think the first thing we have to bring up here is, again, that there are different rules for already established writers and for writers trying to break in. So whenever you do something, that is absolutely what you need to keep in mind.
Yeah, I think, I can't think of any dialogue rules per se that, other than, obviously we've been talking about some things you probably don't want to do, but it's not necessarily a rule. And I don't think, when it comes to dialogue, whatever fits your movie, right? If you got somebody breaking the fourth wall and talking to the audience, rock and roll, as long as it fits the tone and purpose of your film. That's a rule that, I guess people wouldn't necessarily want you to break normally, but if it works for the story, why not? Look at House of Cards, right? The very first episode, the pilot of House of Cards. You're in a different type of show right away when 3 minutes into the show, Kevin Spacey turns around and talks directly to you, and that kind of sets it apart. So I think that's a great thing, but that fits for the show, right? But yeah, I don't think there's any really hard and fast dialogue rules that you'd get massacred for breaking.
Is it okay to use parentheticals?
I would say within reason. Again, you don't want to direct the act. I'm assuming, it's like the parentheticals, like whispers or screams or knowingly or whatever. I think in terms of sound of what you're saying, yes. In terms of attitude of what you're saying, no, because your writing should be so clear and the character's so clearly drawn that the actor will understand what the point of view is when they deliver the line.
Yeah, if the line can be understood or said in the way that you hope it to be said without the parenthetical, remove the parenthetical.
Exactly.
How will an actor interpret this line? Remove the parenthetical. Try reading it. What's the natural way that you're going to say this line? If it's substantially different than what your intention is, then you may need a parenthetical.
Good point. Great point.
Hey, quick technical question. I use continues for dialogue that spans pages and also include a more at the bottom of the first page, but I don't use continues for dialogue on the same page if it's interrupted by action description. That is correct. All in the quest for more white space on the page. Is this okay? Yes, it is. Absolutely. So let's quickly get to our last question. Can you speak from your experience on instances when the director actors may adjust the dialogue while on set or in the midst of a scene? If it's a change the director may want to keep, what role does the screenwriter typically have in these on-the-spot changes?
None.
It depends, obviously, with every situation and what the relationship is, between the writer and the director, if there even is a relationship. Sometimes you're lucky enough to be included and you be involved in those decisions. Sometimes you're not. It just really, there's no right or way wrong to answer that. It's very much situationally specific.
I was on the set of a movie once. It was the very first movie I ever had produced a long time ago back in New York and never got released. But an actor came to me and said, this line of dialogue here, is it okay if I change it to something else? And I looked at the line and I said, no. No, you need to say it exactly as I wrote it, because it was a punchline, and the cumbersome wording of it, which the actor was admittedly stumbling across, was part of the humor of that line. So no, but I fortunately was a producer on that movie, so I had the latitude to actually say no. Otherwise, the director might have just said, yeah, sure, say it however you want. It's hard to say, but most of the time, the writer, if they're allowed on set at all, is nothing more than just a courtesy. Unless you are substantially involved in the making of the project, on more than a writer level, you may not have any ability to input on any of that at all.
Guys, I want to take one last question because it's an important one and I think a lot of people have. And then afterwards, remember, you can always email us and we are always happy to answer your questions if we don't get to your questions, or whenever you have a question, you can always email us. We're happy to answer. It's info@coverageinc.com, as you probably know. Okay, so last question. How long can dialogue be? For example, if any character is explaining its past experience, which is very important to the context of the story. So how long should dialogue or can dialogue be?
Again, and I'm not dismissing the question at all, but it's very situationally specific. It depends on the situation within the script, depends on the characters, depends on the scene, but you want to tend to leave it to less is always better than more.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I would agree. Not much more to say on that one.
That's less.
Okay. That is less is more. And again, you can always email us with questions. And if you said an hour and a half, you won the office pool. We never managed to get them to under an hour, darn. Anyway, thank you so much, guys. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Jim. And yes, email us with questions. And this webinar will be online soon. Okay. Bye-bye, everyone.